The chlorine smell hit Diane Martinez's nostrils before she even opened her back gate. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As she stepped into her backyard, her pristine swimming pool looked like a murky swamp, its once crystal clear water now a sickening shade of brownish green. Floating debris and what appeared to be an entire garden's worth of leaves, dirt, and plant matter created a nightmarish landscape where her pride and joy had been just yesterday. Diane's hands trembled. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Her mind immediately raced to Evelyn Hartwick, the neighborhood's most notorious homeowners association board member, known to everyone in Oak Ridge Estates as the ultimate HOA Karen. For months, Diane had been in a silent war with Evelyn over the smallest of infractions. Her crime? Apparently, her pool fence didn't meet the exact specifications outlined in the neighborhood's 47-page maintenance guidelines, and her lounge chairs were 2 inches outside the designated recreational area as defined by the HOA. Just last month, Evelyn had sent a certified letter demanding Diane replace her pool fence, complete with a diagram showing the precise angles and materials required. The letter was 3 pages long, single-spaced with multiple highlighted sections and sticky notes indicating potential violations. Diane had laughed it off, thinking it was yet another example of Evelyn's legendary pettiness. But this was escalation. The pool pump sputtered and choked, struggling against the massive amount of debris. Diane calculated the damage in her head. This would cost thousands to clean, possibly requiring a complete drainage and professional restoration. Her homeowner's insurance would likely view this as vandalism, which meant police reports and investigations. As she stood there, still in her work clothes, a crisp navy pantsuit from her job as a commercial real estate broker, Diane noticed something else. Nestled among the floating leaves and branches was a pair of gardening gloves. Not just any gloves, but the distinctive bright purple ones she knew Evelyn always wore when tending to her meticulously manicured rose garden. Unbelievable, Diane muttered, pulling out her smartphone and beginning to document everything. She took photographs from multiple angles, capturing the destruction in clinical, precise shots. Her professional training kicked in. Evidence. Always collect evidence. Her neighbor, Marcus Rodriguez, peered over the fence. Diane? Everything okay? His voice carried a note of concern mixed with barely concealed curiosity. Someone sabotaged my pool, she responded coolly, her voice steady despite the rage bubbling underneath. And I have a pretty good idea who. What Diane didn't know, what nobody in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge Estates suspected, was that her discovery and her next actions would trigger a chain of events more dramatic and consequential than anyone could have imagined. This was far more than a petty HOA dispute. This was the beginning of a neighborhood nightmare that would involve 911 unexpected alliances and secrets that had been brewing beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect community for years. The purple gardening gloves seemed to mock her from amid the pool's debris. Game on, Diane thought to herself. Game on. Diane spent the next morning navigating a bureaucratic maze that would have broken a less determined woman. She arrived at the local police station at 7:30 a.m., her folder of meticulously organized evidence tucked under her arm like a weapon. Detective Ray Holbrook listened with a mix of professional courtesy and barely concealed amusement as she laid out her case. Let me get this straight, he said, leaning back in his chair. You believe Evelyn Hartwick deliberately destroyed your pool because of an ongoing HOA dispute. Not believe, Diane corrected sharply. I'm certain. Those gardening gloves, they're distinctive. Purple. Custom order from a specialty gardening website. I've seen Evelyn wear them dozens of times at neighborhood association meetings. Detective Holbrook raised an eyebrow. The precision of her statement, the specific detail about purple gardening gloves, caught his attention. In his 22 years on the force, he learned that devil was in the details, and Diane Martinez seemed like someone who knew exactly how to build a case. What Diane didn't know was that Evelyn Hartwick wasn't just any neighborhood busybody. She had a history, a complicated one that extended far beyond petty HOA regulations. 3 years ago, she'd been forced to resign from her previous position on another homeowners association after a series of controversial disciplinary actions that bordered on harassment. Back in Oak Ridge Estates, Evelyn was blissfully unaware that her little act of revenge was about to unravel spectacularly. She spent her morning pruning her rose bushes, humming softly, convinced that her sabotage would go undetected. The purple gardening gloves, her favorite, were carelessly tossed in the laundry room sink. Diane's next stop was the neighborhood security company. Oak Ridge Estates prided itself on being a gated community with 24-hour surveillance. The security manager, a former military technician named Greg Thompson, was initially hesitant to release footage. We can't just hand over recordings to residents, he explained diplomatically. Diane slid a business card across the desk. Her real estate firm was not only respected, but had done significant development work in the area. I'm not just any resident, Mr. Thompson. and I'm prepared to have my firm's legal team subpoena these records if necessary. The implied threat worked. Within 30 minutes, Gregory was reviewing nighttime footage from the previous evening. What they discovered was both shocking and infuriating. The video showed a figure matching Evelyn's description, identifiable by her distinctive walk and build, approaching Diane's pool area just after midnight. The timestamp was crystal clear. The figure was carrying what appeared to be several large garbage bags filled with debris. "Well," Greg muttered, "that's not something you see every day." Diane's phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus, her neighbor. "Heard about your pool. Evelyn was acting weird this morning. Keeps looking out her window like she's worried someone's watching." The pieces were coming together, but Diane knew this was about more than just a destroyed swimming pool. This was about exposing a pattern of behavior, a petty tyranny that had gone unchecked for too long. Little did she know the next 48 hours would transform a neighborhood dispute into something far more serious, a conflict that would involve law enforcement, hidden community secrets, and a confrontation. The neighborhood association meeting was always a tense affair, but this month's gathering would be remembered for years to come. Diane arrived precisely at 7:00 p.m., her navy blazer pressed, her demeanor calm but charged with an electricity that made other residents shift uncomfortably in their seats. Evelyn Hartwick sat at the head of the table, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and crisp white blouse a stark contrast to the storm brewing around her. She avoided direct eye contact with Diane, instead shuffling papers with an exaggerated concentration that fooled no one. "Before we begin," Diane's voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a knife, "I'd like to address a serious matter concerning property damage and potential criminal activity." The room went silent. Marcus Rodriguez, seated near the back, leaned forward with a mix of anticipation and concern. He'd been helping Diane compile evidence, secretly recording conversations, and documenting Evelyn's increasingly erratic behavior. Diane projected the security camera footage onto the community center's large screen. Frame by frame, she walked the room through the night of the pool sabotage. The evidence was damning, a figure matching Evelyn's description, carrying bags of debris, sneaking around her property in the dead of night. "Ms. Hartwick," Diane addressed her directly, "would you care to explain why you were on my property at midnight, destroying my swimming pool?" Evelyn's face turned a shade of white that seemed impossible for someone with her perpetual tan. Her manicured hand gripped her water glass so tightly that it began to tremble. What happened next was something no one expected. Instead of denying the accusations, Evelyn burst into tears. Not delicate performative tears, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from a place of profound pain and desperation. "You don't understand," she stammered, mascara running in dark rivulets down her cheeks. "I was trying to protect everyone. The pool. It wasn't safe. I knew something was wrong." The room held its collective breath. Detective Holbrook, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, suddenly straightened. Something in Evelyn's tone suggested this was more than just a petty HOA dispute. Marcus leaned over to Diane and whispered, "What is she talking about?" Before Diane could respond, Evelyn continued her broken confession. She pulled out a manila folder from her leather briefcase, a folder that looked like it had been handled extensively, its edges worn and frayed. "There are things about this neighborhood," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Things that have been buried. Your pool was sitting right on top of them." The folder contained a collection of old survey maps, geological reports, and what appeared to be correspondence from decades ago. Something was very wrong, and Diane's simple pool vandalism had just uncovered a much deeper mystery. Detective Holbrook approached the table, his professional demeanor replaced by genuine curiosity. "Ms. Hartwick," he said carefully, "I think you need to explain exactly what you mean." The confrontation had taken a turn that no one, not Diane, not Evelyn, not anyone in the room, could have anticipated. What started as a neighborhood dispute was transforming into something far more complex, with potential implications that stretched far beyond a simple act of vandalism. The first domino had fallen, and there was no stopping what would come next. The next morning, Diane found herself in an unmarked conference room at the local county offices, surrounded by dusty file cabinets and nervous bureaucrats. The manila folder Evelyn had dramatically produced the previous night now lay spread across a large oak table, its contents creating a mosaic of decades-old secrets. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a forensic geologist brought in to examine the documents, looked up with a grave expression. "This is serious," she muttered, tracing her finger along an old survey map. "These geological reports suggest there was something unusual about the land beneath Oak Ridge Estates long before the first house was built." Detective Holbrook had pulled strings to get this emergency meeting together. The folder contained more than just random papers. It was a carefully compiled dossier of environmental and historical records that painted a disturbing picture of the neighborhood's foundation. The pool, Dr. Chen continued, was positioned directly over what appears to be an old industrial site. Not just any site. a chemical disposal area from the 1960s that was never properly remediated. Diane's mind raced. Suddenly, Evelyn's desperate act of pool sabotage made a horrifying kind of sense. She wasn't just being a controlling HOA member, she was trying to prevent something potentially catastrophic. Marcus Rodriguez, who had been allowed to attend the meeting due to his close involvement, leaned forward. "Are you saying there's a contamination risk?" Dr. Chen's nod was slow and deliberate. "Worse. The preliminary ground-penetrating radar scans we've done show potential underground chemical plumes. Your swimming pool was essentially a direct pathway to what could be a massive environmental hazard." The implications were staggering. Oak Ridge Estates, a neighborhood that prided itself on being a pristine, upper-middle-class community, was potentially sitting on a ticking environmental time bomb. Years of perfect lawns, manicured gardens, and neighborhood association regulations could not hide the toxic secret lurking beneath the surface. Evelyn Hartwick, who sat quietly in the corner, looked both vindicated and defeated. Her years of meticulous record-keeping, her seemingly obsessive attention to neighborhood details, it had all been leading to this moment. "I knew something was wrong," she said softly. "For years I've been gathering evidence, trying to warn people. But who listens to the neighborhood busybody?" Detective Holbrook pulled out his notebook. "Miss Hartwick, why didn't you go to the authorities earlier?" A bitter laugh escaped Evelyn's lips. "I tried, multiple times. But do you know how hard it is to prove something like this? The development company, the city, the previous HOA board, they all had reasons to keep this quiet." Diane felt a chill run down her spine. Her destroyed pool was no longer just a personal violation. It was potentially a public health discovery. News outlets would soon be swarming. Property values would plummet. Lives could be at risk. As the meeting concluded, an emergency action plan was quickly taking shape. Environmental protection agencies would be called. The entire neighborhood would need extensive testing. Residents would need to be informed carefully to prevent panic. Marcus looked at Diane and whispered, "Who would have thought a pool dispute would uncover all this?" But the story was far from over. The final piece of the puzzle was yet to be revealed, and it would change everything they thought they knew about Oak Ridge Estates. 12 days after the fateful neighborhood association meeting, Oak Ridge Estates was unrecognizable. Hazmat teams in white protective suits crawled across properties like industrial insects. Yellow caution tape crisscrossed between manicured lawns, and massive drilling rigs punctured the once pristine landscape, extracting core samples that would reveal the full extent of the environmental catastrophe. Diane Martinez stood on her front porch, watching the transformation. The irony was not lost on her. The woman she had once considered her nemesis was now being hailed as a whistleblower, a community hero who had risked everything to expose a dangerous secret. A press conference had been called. Diane knew what was coming. State Environmental Commissioner Karen Rodriguez took the podium, her expression grim. "What we've uncovered is one of the most significant environmental cover-ups in the region's history," she announced. Preliminary tests confirm extensive chemical contamination across the entire Oak Ridge Estates development. The Greenwood Chemical Corporation deliberately buried toxic waste here in the late 1960s and early 1970s, then systematically covered up their actions. Evelyn Hartwick sat in the front row, surrounded by investigative journalists and environmental lawyers. Her decades of meticulous documentation, notebooks, maps, correspondence had become the primary evidence in what was quickly becoming a landmark environmental lawsuit. "I'd always knew," Evelyn told a reporter, her voice steady, "but nobody would listen. Not the city, not the previous HOA boards, not the real estate developers. They all had something to lose." The investigation revealed a shocking narrative. Greenwood Chemical Corporation had used the remote location as a dumping ground for industrial waste, paying off local officials and burying records. The land had been sold and resold, with each transaction carefully obscuring the toxic history beneath. Diane approached Evelyn after the press conference. Their previous animosity seemed ridiculous now. "I owe you an apology," Diane said simply. Evelyn's laugh was both bitter and triumphant. "No, you owe me a thank you. Your pool, the one I sabotaged, was the key. The ground disturbance helped us discover the contamination before someone could get seriously ill." The aftermath was swift and transformative. Property values in Oak Ridge Estates plummeted to near zero. Greenwood Chemical Corporation faced billions in potential lawsuits. Several high-ranking city officials were under criminal investigation for decades of concealment. Marcus Rodriguez, who had supported Diane throughout the entire ordeal, summed it up best. Sometimes, he told her, the most unlikely people become heroes. And sometimes a destroyed swimming pool can save an entire community. As the sun set on Oak Ridge Estates, the neighborhood looked like a war zone, but it was a war against environmental negligence, against corporate greed, against years of systematic cover-ups. Diane realized that her simple dispute with the HOA had uncovered something far more significant than she could have ever imagined. The purple gardening gloves that had started it all now sat in an evidence bag, a small piece of proof that sometimes the most obsessive behavior can be driven by the most noble of intentions. What had begun as a neighborhood conflict had become a story of environmental justice, of persistence, of the truth finally breaking through decades of silence.